Okay, so we're recording, and just for everybody that's joined us so far, the plan for the day is that Tony and Duncan are both gonna sort of like go through some different like skill building things that we can do online. They're gonna use the book that they co-wrote together for a lot of it. So we'll do a big plug. Yeah.
That one. Yeah.
That one. We also, we have here, if you're watching in America. So they're both going to reference that quite a bit, and they have kind of structured it in two different ways. So Duncan's going to start by just going through and giving like a really brief overview of like using slip as a whole. So like different ways to decorate with it. In different ways that it can be used. And then Tony is going to do like a more specific demo that revolves sledging plaster. And then I think we're going to meet again next week and the roles will be flipped around. So Tony will give like a broader talk about making molds and making prototypes, and Duncan will like focus in on a more specific thing. And then so Anders and I are the studio managers at BKLYN CLAY, and for the time being, we still have access to some ceramic equipment, so we might start doing some of the demos with Tony and Duncan as our coaches, which I think sounds pretty fun.
So could we coach you live then?
I think that's the idea. I was just saying I would love to have you just live critiquing me in front of 24 different people.
Yeah.
So, maybe we do it during your guys' happy hour too.
Well, we're on the mouth eye. That'll go well.
Went on for a bit more than an hour the other night.
Actually, at 1 a.m. is probably a reasonable time at your end, isn't it? It's not at all.
Great. So maybe Duncan, if you, I mean, I know it looks like it's a lot of your students from Central St. Martin's, but if you just want to give like a brief introduction to who you are and where you work and teach out of.
Yeah. So I'm Duncan Hewson, for those who didn't tune in the other night, and I'm Stage 1 leader at Central St. Martin's, teaching along with my colleagues who are also who are joining us tonight. So Emma Lacey, Ian McIntyre and Tony Quinn, who's our course leader. Tony and I wrote this book in 2011, so it's 9 years old now, published in 2012.
Luckily the subject's 30,000 years old.
Yeah, and what did we bring?
It's relatively contemporary in the canon, you know.
So it was an opportunity to work together before we started teaching together, really. And I teach at Central St. Martin's, and I also teach in a similar, it's not the same as BKLYN CLAY, but a place called Morley College in central London, which is 5 minutes from Westminster. So 5 minutes from that big clock on top of the Houses of Parliament that you may know, Big Ben. So I teach 5 minutes and have fabulous Waterloo sunsets I teach there just on Thursdays now. And my head of department is also joining us tonight, Annette Welsh. So she's going to link up with you guys as well, hopefully. And that's me. So I teach on the course, and mainly first year, look after them, and third year tutorials. Over to you, Tony.
What am I saying? I thought you were going
Well, no, do you want to introduce yourself and then I'll kick off with the slip?
I thought you did a very good job then. I was happy with that.
Oh, thank you very much.
Trust you impeccably. Go for it, man.
Okay.
You driving the ship for a while. I'll join in after.
Okay. So what we've decided to do is I'll give you an overview of slip decoration. So for you very experienced makers out there, you'll know everything, or you think you know everything about slip and slip decoration. But hopefully there will be some reminders out there that if we flick through tonight, the kind of section in the book on slip decoration, I realise now, having gone through it, it was quite a big part of the book, really. I'm surprised they let us get away with it. But we'll give you an overview of it, and then Tony's going to focus particularly on one technique in plaster. So the next coming weeks, we're going to flip the next time. So I'll give a very specific run through of a particular technique, and Tony's going to give a much wider kind of overview of plaster techniques. So it's just really this tonight was to give you a trailer really of how the sessions possibly will work, and that'll be feedback from you guys as well. You know, people saying, you know, well, we want to see a bit more of this, and how about that, and obviously we'll draw in questions and answers to the whole program as well. So if I start by sharing my screen, so I've just put a PowerPoint together of the pages relevant from the book, and just to give you a very quick overview. I've been given 10 minutes, which I've probably run out of time already, but I'll put it on timer. As we're so, or our students are pressurized about time, it'll be a lesson for me as well.
Yeah, Duncan, I think that's one thing that you said in there that's really important is, like, we're all sort of learning how to do this, like teach ceramics online together. So if you have really specific ideas or like feedback about how we are doing things, like please let us know so we can make adjustments. Yeah.
Okay. So what do you know about slip? For me, it's just one of those exciting materials that once you've made something, it's one of those opportunities to really start thinking about how you're going to finish the work. Quite often, makers, they get involved with the material, they're kind of pushing their kind of work schedule, and they think, okay, I'm going to get this to the bisque firing, having missed this incredible opportunity to start really engaging with the surface. And what I'm just going to give a quick overview about is actually the potential of that surface. And I know a lot of makers out there, once the clay starts to dry, they start to lose interest in the form, because there's almost a lack of quality to dry clay. And people get excited about the freshness of it and the malleability of it. But for me, it's that first opportunity to really think about how this thing is going to end up after the firing. So obviously it's important about how you apply it, but also the consistency of slip, how you put it together, the colours, the sorts of colours that you're interested in, your personal palette, and how to explore that. But also thinking about it as an undercoat. So almost when we teach beginners, it's to get them into the headspace of thinking that whatever you apply at this stage is actually going to give you results no matter what glaze you put over it. So it's thinking very much about how you make up your own clays, how you make up your own slips, which obviously if you dry them out fully will become coloured clay bodies. And we're using clay with the addition of body stains. Also, there's this thing about language where we've adopted obviously American terms as well, and so it's cross-cultural in that sense that we have vitreous slips, we have engobes, we have decorating slips, we have different terminology. So it'll be interesting to hear from BKLYN Clay's side also what you call these things. So we'll go into that a little bit more. And then just to show you some examples of things that you can do with slip that I don't think you can do with any other material in ceramics. So that goes for underglazes, on glaze, decals, whatever you're doing with it. Slip has a very particular quality. And it's that particular quality that we'll start investigating through pages of the book with certain examples that we've used. And some of the time it was difficult to get images off makers, but other times they were really generous in sharing that information. And talking about personal friends' work. So Simon Carroll, Dan Wright on the right, using very particular slip techniques along with other techniques.
Duncan,
yes. Tony.
Can we say who was the trickiest person to get images off? That'd be quite funny.
I'll start devising that list, because there is a bloody list, as you know. So it was interesting to get responses. And this goes for what Tony was great at, was getting students to put work in. And I love that element of the book where it's not just talking to professionals, it's students who were on the CSM course. and colleagues of mine from Morley who were, you know, Annette provided some images for the glaze and things. And Annette loves slip as well. She adores slip application, and has got extensive resources. But it was really interesting to get students' work who were just discovering the material, also in the book. This is somebody called Al Qasadi, who uses slip on plaster. Sarah Morehouse, who must have a very steady hand, because that's just incredible, intense kind of decoration on that symmetrical form. A guy called Nicholas Arawavi Portela, who dropped off the scene a bit. He's now living in Barcelona, but using terra sigillata to spray. And often we think of slip actually covering the clay qualities, but actually they can enhance them. So that enhancement of surface through slip. Different techniques like sponge decoration, which can be seen as a bit naff, but actually you can make a fortune from it, as Emma Bridgewater could testify with her industrial wear. And then objects I own also, this pot from Simon Carroll, and how he used an old technique, you know, looking at the work of Thomas Toft, and bringing that into a real contemporary context. Different sorts of wax, also resist techniques with wax and latex. And then probably somebody who has thrown the kitchen sink of decoration techniques at every single pot he makes, which is Grayson Perry. So looking at his work, and then different techniques such as inlay, and how you go about that, what are the best conditions for the clay. And there you'll see about making your own slip, terra sigillata, which is sealed earth, which is basically the finest particles of slip. And the pot on the right-hand side is one of my first ever projects in 1980, when I was on the BA Ceramic Design course in Bristol. And that was a burnishing project we had set for just a week. And that was about goalposts and spot floodlights. So that was about a football. And this is something from my home, somebody called Nicola Tassi, who no longer makes work like that on the left. And then some of Simon Carroll's work, and a friend, Dan Wright, who uses slip extensively. And then about printing with slip, this is work from Steve Brown, who's a lecturer at the Royal College of Art. So Tony asked him to submit work for the book, and various techniques through that. So that's kind of a run through, an overview of what we could be covering in the next term, with specific focus on slip. But we'll see how long, you know, it might only be three, 4 sessions. We'll see what we can get out of it. But that's it for now, folks, from me. So stay well, stay free, and stay in, basically. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Cool. Okay. Thank you, Duncan. Yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions, feel free to like write them in using the chat as we go along. But do you know, Duncan, do you have any idea on like what you're gonna dive into next time? Yeah, I think it'll really be a bit about brushwork and about the potential of enhancing texture. So really that idea that as makers, we come very attuned to the material, very sensitive to the surface. So it's really thinking about when we're reflecting on, you know, and it's this constant, as you know, this constant conversation with the surface while you're making, not only about the form, but actually the quality, and how you can, you know, suddenly you can lose an object by just messing too much with the surface. But the potential of slip to actually enhance that, or to build in this thing that we know as makers, when this thing comes out the bisque fire, it's a bit one of those moments where you just go, oh, you know, so what am I going to do with it now? So you see this whole, you know, backlog of just bisque wear. Whereas actually, if you've got some slip on it and you're working in a reflective, intuitive way, that slip decoration can really start to move your work along. So it's giving you other opportunities for decoration. So yeah, I think I'm going to write that down now and stick to that before I change.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So, yeah,
it's okay. You don't need to write it down. You just need to watch the video back.
Yeah.
I'm going to take your suggestion and just not watch anything back. I think it's the best. Okay. So yeah, texture and kind of surface enhancement we'll go for.
Great. Thanks, Duncan.
Okay, thanks a lot, Gus.
Okay, Tony.
No questions so far. Okay, I've obviously answered everybody's questions. Oh no, Sarah Howard's bound to have a question. Oh, bloody hell. Hello, Sarah. Or is she not? I can see a big S on my screen, but does everyone else got that?
Maybe she needs to unmute.
Yeah, we hear you, Sarah.
No, she's not muted.
Any examples on the shelf behind you? Yeah, actually, Emma, yeah, there is. There's I'm going to do a tour on Friday of my ceramics collection, but this is a vase made by one of my best friends, Dan Wright, who owns a gallery in St. David's in Pembrokeshire. And he went for a time of just using high-fired slip, so no glaze at all. And he's concentrating now on painting also, but Dan also made this work, and this was sold in, I don't know if you can see that, he made a lot of money from Barney's in New York in the mid-80s. But sadly, Barney's started to push as he sold more, they started to push his prices down. So sadly, he ended up where he got full order books, but so he was making this work exclusively hand thrown for Barney's, but the price unit, he just couldn't, basically just couldn't afford to make it in the end. So went into teaching, but he's now potting full time again, which is great. So yeah, slip, we're going to talk a little bit about this as well. So that was in the cupboard behind me. This was a mug made by Simon Carroll. Also, what was nice was that with first years, some first years might be online, I think they are. But I brought in my mug collection, and that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit on Friday. Of just the narrative of those mugs, not so much about the techniques, but actually as we discussed, like the story behind them. Any other questions? No questions from Sarah. Any examples yet? Okay.
Cool.
Is that all right, Emma? Has that answered your? Was there anything else up there? Oh yeah, there's a few more up there.
Yeah, everyone should tune back in at the same time on Friday for Duncan's collection tour.
Narrated by Tony Quinn.
Except we'll be drinking then, so we'll be better.
Yeah, it's compulsory to have a drink in your hand when you join us.
It's actually the happy hour.
That is the happy hour. Yeah, it can be lemonade, it can be tonic water. We don't,
I'm getting desperate, locked in. I'm going hard.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you, Emma. Lovely. Yes.
Thanks a lot. Cool. Okay. Tony, do you want to introduce yourself and just talk about what you're gonna talk about?
Okay. Yeah. So my name's Tony Quinn. I'm the head of ceramics at St Martin's, and Duncan is my colleague. Runs the first year very ably. Trust him with my life. Well, trust him with the first year's life. Yeah. And so we've sort of come up with this slightly harebrained scheme based on we'd like to collaborate with Brooklyn Clay. We collaborated with Brooklyn Clay last year during New York Design Festival, and we did some really cool work as part of the Wanted Festival. And so the idea really when all this went down was to sort of, we were supposed to be coming to work with you again live in May, and so that got cancelled, and then it was okay, what are we going to do about it? So this sort of slightly harebrained approach came about, and then I kept saying, I think we could demonstrate without physically having a studio, without actually having the stuff. So I'm going to try and sort of exemplify that now. Duncan's done the sort of overview, and I'm going to try and physically do it by having taken photographs with my phone of the book and put a presentation together, and I'm just going to talk over it as if I was doing a demonstration. It may or may not work. It might be a little bit mad, but let's see.
But also, Tony, sorry to interject, and I won't do it again, but if first years are online listening to this, this is almost an example of how we're going to take next term as well with your project work. So it will be, the tutorials will be very reflecting in the moment and looking at what you've done. So a bit like that.
Yeah, I think we'll also get to a point where Anders and I here in Brooklyn will start trying to go through some of these things based off of these demos. So everyone will get to see us like fumble with it as we learn how to do it.
Yeah, I look forward to that. That's going to be a bit mad. I quite like the idea of like, no, stop.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk through the introduction to how to sledge or profile a plaster model. We use the word sledging. I'm going to start a stopwatch as well, so stick to time. We use the word sledging and profiling interchangeably. Sort of the idea of sledge is a bit of a colloquial term, which comes from when people would sledge huge architrave arches and stuff, and they would be like a massive workshop, and they'd have a sort of central arch, a central sort of what do you call it, like a column, and they would run a huge arc off the column, and they would get the apprentice in the studio to sit on the frame like it was a sled running down a hill, you know, so like they were going through the snow. So that we think that's where the term comes from, but it's essentially the process of striking a profile through soft plaster. Actually, I'm gonna go. So this is the sort of principle. We will make a tool, and can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So we make a tool in a sort of thin sheet of metal, usually sort of zinc or aluminium, about 1 millimeter thick, and sort of cut it to shape. And then we would also make a template, ideally out of something like Perspex, but I have seen people use wood. The problem with wood is it sort of distorts as the plaster is wet. So Perspex, or sort of acrylic material, is not porous, so the liquid in the plaster doesn't affect it. But essentially we have 3 parts. So we have the sort of tool, the template, and then the sort of block or something to hold the tool at 90 degrees to the surface. And one of the key things is the block should not touch the template. So it should be a good few millimeters between the edge of the template and the block, because otherwise that will sort of foul the tool as it goes around, get in the way. And then there's a sort of principle at play, a bit of sort of like soft physics, is that you have to both press down and press in to meet the template, whilst with the other hand, so here this is drawn right-handed, so my right hand would be where the block is, and I would be applying force sort of both down and in, so sort of diagonal direction. At which point with my left hand, I would rotate the template through the tool. One of the things that people often make mistakes in this process is they move the tool a lot. And actually what you do have to move the tool, but it doesn't move a huge distance. What you should be doing is rotating the plaster through the tool. So, and that allows you to press in and press down with force, and then the material passes through the tool, not the other way around. Sometimes that moves a bit, but as a general principle, a really good way of ensuring success is to try and do that. So how we make a tool is, this is a sort of jeweler's fret saw, very thin blade, and this is a technical drawing, sort of cut out, technical drawing up here, cut out, stuck with spray mount onto the piece of zinc or aluminium, whatever it is, and cut very accurately with this jeweler's tool. It takes a little bit of a technique to get used to it, but you'll snap the blade a few times. It's unavoidable when you first do it. And the ideal thing is to cut very close to the line. So then what we use is a file here, and we file it down and finish the tool to the line. And I haven't drawn it here, actually I should have drawn it, but if you consider where the paper is, this is the front of the tool, then you should chamfer away to the back of the tool. So it's a bit like a blade. It doesn't have to be particularly sharp, but it should have like a cutting edge, much like a chisel. and that allows for the sort of material to be cut. So here you see here, so the used tools, the same tool actually, but photographed after its use. And then you have the sort of block there, you can see it's not touching the edge of the tool. And then we have the sort of profile cut to the shape of the drawing. So that's the sort of setup. Then so in the sort of setting up of the process, so we place the template, we stick it down with some Yoo-hoo type sort of simple adhesive glue. Doesn't have to be stuck down for the rest of your life. It's quite good if you can get it off the board. Place it on a wheel, securing with three or four bits of damp clay. Now the key thing here is to sort of place the board on the wheel and press the clay into the edges of where the bat and the board and the wheel meets. Not some people, what they do is they press the clay onto the wheel and press the board down onto the clay, but what we want is it to be perfectly flat, not to have a sort of slight bump. So it's much easier to use the clay as like a glue. Build really nice strong walls here that self-support each other, and leave a little bit of a gap between the tool, the template, and the cottling, the wall. Then as we mix the plaster, so this shows part of it. So here I might mix sort of 2 or 3 liters, well, 2 liters of plaster. Usually mix the ratio of approximately 1 part water to 1.5 parts plaster. But you can get that information from the supplier of the plaster. And then immediately after we pour it and get rid of any lumps, we would decant a bit of plaster off, a small amounts, maybe a quarter of a litre, and just leave it to one side. And this is an important part of the process, because what happens is when you mix plaster with your hand, you're speeding up the chemical process. So if we decant some plaster and leave it to one side, it's actually going through the chemical change slower. But the vital or the important part here for us is it's the same mixture of plaster. So if we needed to repair the model later, it's simply it's very easy to adhere to the model, and it doesn't create any sort of hard lumps where if you mix the separate mix. So then I mix the plaster for 4 or 5 minutes, pour it into the clay wall, and then allow it to sort of set for a while, but only like a minute or 30 seconds. A good way of telling whether the plaster will support itself. So what I'm doing here is I'm pulling the wall away, and you can see it's a sort of like cheesy mixture where it's holding its own shape. Because I want to work with the plaster when it's really soft. A good way of knowing when to start is that you can see on the surface the plaster as it settles, it goes from a sort of shiny, sort of liquid surface, and it starts to dull, and that's literally the sort of water being sucked into the plaster, and that's a really good indicator of it's getting to that point where it's no longer a liquid and it's going off. So it's just a good visual clue. Take the walls away, and then very quickly I use a scraper, a sort of right angle tool. I don't use the tool that I've cut, to remove the excess plaster really quickly. This is again one of those things that people don't do, and they spend too long getting to this point. So I would take that straight edge and I would just pull the plaster through the straight edge, so I can get to the point where I can see the perspex at the bottom. Because this is, if you spend too long trying to get from excess plaster to this point, the actual plaster could be too hard by that point. So the real key moment is I will take those walls away and do this in about 30 seconds. I'll go from taking the wall away to knowing where the edge of the template is really quickly. And that also gives me more working time, because I don't want to spend a long time working with the excess plaster. I want to work with the plaster that is actually going to become the model. And then I start to strike the tool. So that means I'm pulling the sort of the plaster where possible through the tool. Sometimes I'll go backwards and forwards, but as a general principle, you can see these nice grainy images because I've literally photographed the book and then blown it up. And so there you can see the sort of tool has gone through in some parts and not touched the other yet. And then eventually we're closing in on the form, so we repeat the process. Here at the top I have excess plaster. And that's because one of the things that I do is that if we don't make it, so there's this large flat area. If I made a tool that came up this profile and went along this flat bottom, it would create friction and vibration. And if it creates friction and vibration here, it will be transposed onto the surface here. Now this profile is the important part. The flat area I can just flatten with a Surform or another tool. So I don't need to spend time trying to remove this material. I'll do it when the plaster's soft. The most important detail is this. And so as we go around, we sort of start to get very close to shape, and then you'll see like sort of holes like this, because it's really difficult in that first phase. Okay, look, I'm a minute behind schedule. You'll see in that first phase, it's quite difficult to secure the surface to get a really clean surface, and you'll get blemishes like this here. So this is where that extra mix comes in. I go back to that mix that we decanted off, and that's still liquid. That's still really sort of runny. And I drizzle this over the surface of the plaster, and I catch these gaps here and repair them. And I'll do that 2 or 3 times. I'll maybe sponge some water over it as well. And then I get very close to finishing, and then I'll remove this excess plastic, because that just, to try and take that off while I was working, I would lose too much time. I just let the plastic go off. Gets a bit messy for a while, but then eventually we end up with a final model like this. And then one of the key things is just allow it to go off, and it will lift off the plaster really easily, especially if you use a very fine kidney or straight edge tool to push underneath gently. Again, this is one of those situations where people tend to damage the model by forcing it. Just wait for it. Once it's fully gone off and it's cured, it will release itself from the perspex. We don't need to force it. And that's the entire process. Super quick. Okay.
It's a good image.
Yeah, I just thought to just threw that one together, that one. I was going to say, and I was going to put another and write, COVID, but I thought that we don't need to get into that.
Tony, when you're first mixing the plaster, when do you pour off when do you decant that like little?
I would this bit, okay, I would decant this part. So I haven't got an image of mixing the plaster, but so if I pour, 2 liters of plaster to 3 kilos of 2 liters of water, 3 kilos of plaster approximately, I would then mix it very vigorously. I would allow it to settle for maybe a minute or 2, and that allows the water to infiltrate into the sort of plaster molecules, and it makes it easier to mix. That's actually a good tip, because people tend to sort of put the hand in straight away, and a lot of the time they're fighting with like trying to sort of break down the sort of lumps of plaster. So the first phase is to let it settle. Again, and the term that's come from the ceramics industry in the UK or in Stoke-on-Trent is, we call that quenching. And so we allow this sort of water to infiltrate the plaster. Leave that for 2 or 3 minutes, and then start to mix it. And the minute I have got rid of all of the sort of lumps of plaster, and that would probably only take a minute or 90 seconds, then I pour this decanted plaster off, because I want that to be as early in the process as possible. And then I go, I leave that to one side, and then I mix the main mix of plaster for another 4 or 5 minutes. So in total, it's about 7 minutes of mixing the plaster. And that's for a sort of very standard modeling plaster. I can't remember the ones that you use in the US, but we don't here. I wouldn't use a very fine modeling plaster like Cristacal, because they have a really long mixing time but a really short working time. And this technique actually takes about the setup takes a really long time, but from the point of mixing the plaster to having the model is about 10 minutes. It's really short. In fact, the longest part of the process will be removing this excess plaster. The actual this bit, making the model itself, is really quick. but then allow it to go off a bit and then start to remove the plaster. And this will take nearly as long as the thing itself. But the beauty of the process is the tool and the template sort of build in success. You know, they actually ensure success, and then if it's done in a really methodical way, the chances of success are really high. So it's all in that sort of preparation.
Tony, would you also just really quickly explain the chisel edge, which side of the blade gets that?
So here in this diagram, so if we think of this front edge here as the highest edge, we would sort of chamfer away from it. So I should have drawn it. I'll draw it now actually, and I'll show you on. This is the beauty of being on camera.
Yeah, this is great.
So I just need to stop sharing. So that's how it would look. So this bit is the front of the tool.
Okay.
And this is the back of the tool. So the edge is here. So it's higher, if you like, but the point is at the front of the tool, and it chamfers away. But it doesn't have to be super sharp. It's just a principle of making it like a blade, like this. But you shouldn't be cutting yourself with it when you're cleaning the plaster off, because the plaster is still soft. Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that work?
Yeah, that makes sense. This is good. I'm excited to try it.
Okay, so we're going to do a live demo with you guys next week in the studio.
Yeah. Based just off of the...
Oh! What are you not getting?
I know, that's
Tony, sorry, could I ask something?
Yeah, go on.
So you said that you just use regular potter's plaster to make the model then?
Yeah, can do. You can use all sorts of potter's plaster, fine cast, but nothing like Cristacal or even none of those like mold making plasters, because they're too dense and they cure.
Too dense. Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes I might mix so I might mix Cristacal and potter's plaster.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't get all the potter's plaster last year, so we started to use fine cast and actually prefer that. It's a nicer surface. The potter's plaster is really sort of grainy and porous, but
it's a bit more durable as well, isn't it?
Yeah, but you can still get a good model out of potter's plaster. It all relies on the tool. So if I just go back to that, one of the key things is the surface here. So this surface needs to be sort of clean.
Yeah.
And so when the students have seen me do this demo, you can see at the moment there's sort of clay. So in that next phase, I would be cleaning both the sort of taking the plaster away, but also continually cleaning the surface, because I don't want this plaster or this clay to stay on the surface, because then when I'm using the actual cut tool, which is, you can't see it's behind there, it would create a sort of vibration up the form.
Yeah.
Because the plaster is soft, so any slightest bit of vibration is transposed into the model, and it's part of the reason why this diagram is important, because this sort of press down and press in, and then rotating the tool in a way. I'm holding one hand. It's not strictly true what I'm describing, but a lot of people move the tool too far. What you want to do is the plaster to go through the tool. It's a bit intuitive, but people, when they first use it, they tend to try and do it all with the tool. And the perfect thing, especially in this sort of simple oval form, is I will almost make the entire thing where the tool has moved maybe 20 or 30 millimeters maximum, and most of the movement has been in the rotation of the template.
Thank you.
Tony,
it
was interesting what you said about Cristacal having different setting time. And it's something where I wish I'd had that information 25 years ago or so, because I nearly lost my hand where the whole bucket just set on me. I'd never used Cristacal before. And so I'd used potter's plaster. And so I mixed this first batch up. And as I was mixing, I was thinking, God, this is getting thick. And I honestly just got my hand out in time before the whole bucket just went complete lump. So yeah, I never knew that about it having different setting times. But it's amazing stuff to use, Christopher, if you just do sculpture rather than kind of any modelling with it.
Yeah, it works really well. It's just it takes a long time. That's the main thing.
In
industry,
sorry, yeah, go on, Ian.
Is it all right if I just ask one more technical question?
Yeah, go for it.
You know, when you've sledged the model and you're taking the top off it, you're flattening the top. What do you use to make sure that's perfectly flat? Do you use like a surface gauge, or do you literally just use the Surform and then?
No, I use the Surform to remove most of the material, but then I would use a scraper or something with like a nice flat edge, and then just test it with a sort of steel rule.
A steel rule, okay, to take the last bit off. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so just I wouldn't use a template then. I'd just do it by eye, really.
Right. Thank you.
Cool. Great. I feel like
as a sort of just proof of concept, how did that go then? I know I just spoke as if I was doing a demonstration, but how did it work on screen?
I thought that was brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really important. Yeah.
Very clear.
I think what's scary is we've already had 50 minutes.
Yeah.
I think it was really useful to have the good images, Tony, because sometimes when you're watching a demo live like that with 30 people and the plaster's going off quickly, you miss some of those details. So, you know, I'm not saying this is better, but somewhere in between, this is really useful, actually kind of being able to pause on some of those moments where you're cleaning up with a tool.
Or go back even.
I'll go back, yeah.
Actually, the funny story from when we did the book is the guy who took the photos was he was a food photographer, so he would go, you know, he'd go and work with chefs, and they would make these incredible meals, and he would take loads of these style shots of the food because the food doesn't change; it just gets cold, so he'd have a really long time to do it, and then he'd be sort of taking a photograph over my shoulder, and he'd say, "Can you just stop there?" And I'm like, "No."
Or can you do that again? It's like,
yeah, can you do it again?
Repeat that move. No, it's gone now. It's past. Yeah.
So I used to say, can you not just put it on sports mode? Take hundreds of pictures and I'll select the good one. And he was like, "I'm professional." Yeah, me too.
Yeah, Tony, when I heard your alarm go off, I thought, oh no, his plaster's gonna set.
Yeah. But I think what Emma said is interesting, where Jennifer from Brooklyn Clay was saying about, and I know Annette and I have a similar sort of conversation about how do we get students who just want to do to actually listen to more detail. And I think that's what this does. It really focuses, and now is the time to be focused for all our students. Yeah. But for really to pick up on those sort of details where you don't think, I'll pick that up at some point, or, you know, I'll come across it again. But actually the use of listening to you talk through that process, it goes in. It's, for me.
Just seen a question from Carter saying, is there any way of using the excess plaster? I would say in this instance, the excess plaster, I mean, these images are zoomed right in. We're talking, it's not a huge amount of excess plaster because the clay wall is very close to the template. And then the excess plaster on top is minimal. So we'd be talking in terms of sort of quantity, maybe half a kilo. So it's not a huge, we've focused a lot on the idea of waste, but it's not a huge amount of waste in the process.
So yes, Sarah's just made a really good point in the questions about how she's looking into this as a third-year project. And that thing about recycling plaster, where there is a Danish company or Finnish company who found out, Sarah, I don't know if we've had a conversation about that, how they reheat plaster, that industrially they collect it now and it's used for plaster boards and various other materials, because they can't get a super fine finish with it, but they heat it up and break it down and it is reusable. Where, yeah, I didn't realise that they could do that with plaster. I thought it was inert to the point where you couldn't recycle it. Because as we know, it used to just go completely to landfill.
Yeah, and used in the building industry and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, just to, so in a way, just to reiterate, so myself and Duncan through the book, but maybe see Emma on screen there, like the rest of the team from St Martin's are hoping to work with the guys at BKLYN CLAY to do more of this stuff. I'm sort of speaking specifically to our guys in London at the moment, but also maybe anyone who's in New York or Brooklyn and watches this maybe on repeat, or whatever it is. What do you call that? On demand. That's yeah, so we hope to do more of this sort of stuff, and actually I would say to look out for the content coming from BKLYN CLAY. You're a week or two ahead of the curve than us on this, so you've been doing some really cool like studio visits, and Anders did a talk around his studio at work the other day, and it's just, and maybe there's even like a sort of call and response thing. Somebody could say, can you demonstrate this? Because you've got a lot of sort of teachers at your end as well.
Yeah.
There's also there's a point which we say to students as well at Central and at Morley College, where if they keep using these processes, they become the real experts at this. Yeah. So that they pass our knowledge and our skills. So some of the people I teach at Morley College, some of the use of techniques is fantastic. So actually getting some of our students to share those things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. We want them to become the experts, don't we? That's
that's the whole point.
And educators, that's why,
Yeah, I think one of the great things about this and making these videos and putting them out there is that it does give us a chance to sort of like tap into people that have like really developed an expertise in these like really specific ways of working, and hopefully we can sort of set up a forum where anybody can kind of enter into it and like share these techniques with the much larger community beyond their studio.
Yeah.
Well, I think particularly at this time, I mean, we know how much content there is on ceramics on YouTube. You know, we know that. But I think what is different with this is the kind of call and response thing. It is the Q&A potential of it.
Yeah.
Because we know, you know, if you just type ceramics into YouTube, you could leave it running for a month or two.
Yeah.
with the most inane potter's tips I've ever come across that you never get one of them.
Yeah, for me the issue there is quality. You know,
quality.
It is quality. Yeah.
Quality.
Got a book.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, there's another one as well. Duncan.
That was that. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, different copy. In fact, I've got the American copy somewhere.
There we go.
Very nice.
Yeah,
I've still got the original with the dust jacket. Edition 1, you know.
I've run out of them. I've got the hardcover now.
That's going to be a lot someday, Tony. First. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe we'll leave it there for today, but we're going to be back. Is it at 6 London time, 1 New York time on Friday?
Happy hour. Yeah, happy hour for us.
Yeah, so we'll do happy hour here too, a little early.
Okay,
I like your style.
Yeah, and then we'll be back again next week doing some more of these.
Well, you're doing other stuff in between, yeah?
Yeah, we have quite a bit of stuff in between. So check the BKLYN CLAY Instagram. That's where the main place that we've been sharing things that are coming up throughout the week. I think we have a demo happening with one of our instructors, Hawk and Lindsay, this week. Maybe tomorrow. I believe we have maybe a studio visit happening over the weekend. So take a look at the Instagram, and then which is just BKLYN CLAY, and then also there should be a link on there to our YouTube channel, which is where we're recording all of these and putting them up on YouTube so that people can access them. So please, like, share them with your community. I see that there's a lot of instructors on here today, but also reach out. We're really trying to put some stuff together. So if you have specific ideas, like, we'd love to work with more people. And we're so happy that Tony and Duncan have been so up to do these so far. It's a great thing.
Well, as we say, there is a community of practice out there, so it's a time actually to put that to the test, really.
I'd just like to thank you for inviting me along, Duncan and Tony, and to see you BKLYN Clay guys as well. Thanks very much.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah, I should tell everybody really quick. BKLYN is spelled BKLYN, the way we spell it. But yeah,
is that the cool way of spelling it? Yeah,
that's the cool way of spelling it. Cool. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Okay, thanks so much, folks. See you Friday.
Bye.
Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.